Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And in fact, good morning to one of our speakers. We'll come on to that shortly. It's really lovely to be here with you this afternoon. Where better on a cold, wet March day in London. My name's Bob Claber. I'm a consultant paediatrician. I'm the Director of Strategy, Research and Innovation at Imperial College Healthcare, and have been the host of a number of these webinars, our Better Hospital webinars. And the context of these really is we have an amazing opportunity at Imperial College Healthcare to redevelop all three of our main hospitals. So Charing Cross Hospital, Hammersmith Hospital and St Mary's Hospital are all part of the new hospital programme, which is a programme of rebuilding hospitals across the country. Those of you who are our patients and our clinicians and other people who work in the hospitals will know full well that they need to be redeveloped. But as we're doing that, we're trying to really think imaginatively about how we do that, really with a strong eye to the future. We've been thinking about sustainability, we've been thinking about future pandemics, we've been thinking about the role of our hospitals as anchors in their local community. And today we're thinking about data and artificial intelligence and innovation and around how we can utilize data and AI to transform healthcare. We want to explore who are going to be the beneficiaries around this and how does this fit in with how we're thinking about future hospitals. So we've got a wonderful group of guests to take us through this story. Before I get on to our wonderful guests, I want to just introduce you to another bit of technology. We've all become Teams experts or Zoom experts, or I was asked to do some webinar on some platform that wouldn't even load last time round, but I'm hoping you've been able to get onto Teams. There are different versions of Teams. So the version we're on today, those of you who've joined have the pleasure of being camera off, and you don't have to worry about your microphone accidentally turning on. But what you can do is access our question and answers. So I think where it is, there are two buttons to look at. There's one which you'll be used to from Teams, which is the chat function. That's one to actually leave alone. I think you can have access to it, but we're not going to be looking at that and monitoring that for questions. But you'll see there's an icon that's called Q&A, and it's two speech bubbles with a sort of question mark in them that are sort of overlapping each other. And if you have a click on that, you should be able to submit questions as we're going along, or indeed when we get to the panel discussion and Q&A. My job is to keep a good eye on that. So please do put in lots of questions, and Dan and Amy and Carl, who you're going to meet shortly, will endeavour to get really stuck in on them, and we'll try and build a bit of a conversation rather than a sort of question answer around those a little bit later. So that's your Q&A function. We are recording this session. The reason for that is we put it up on our website, and we've had in previous Better Hospital webinars, lots of people get in touch afterwards and enjoy watching them. So that's the purpose of that. I hope that's okay for everyone who's involved. So listen, without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Dan, who is going to kick things off with us. And Dan will introduce his background. A special thank you to Dan, because Dan was a relatively last-minute substitute. But as you're going to see, a bit like that striker who comes on for the second half and scores the winning goal, I have absolutely no doubt. So Indra Joshi, who's a friend and colleague of ours, had to pull out relatively last minute. Dan, we're massively grateful. Your background around innovation, life sciences, medtech, AI is perfect for this. Let me pass the baton on to you to say hello, and you're going to start us off with some of the thinking.
Great, thanks a lot, Bob. What an introduction. It's wonderful to be here, sort of talking to you about some of the work we're doing in AI. It's particularly exciting to be talking to the Imperial community, because my sort of origin story starts here, and I was born at one of your great hospitals. So a particular kind of glow in being invited to speak here. I've got a couple of slides that I'll use to showcase some of the work that we're doing in the Innovation Research and Life Sciences team at NHS England around AI. I'm a deputy director in that team, who are sort of trying to kind of drive and advocate for broad range of innovations in the NHS, and there's a particular focus on kind of digital technologies, data-driven technologies, and AI in particular. I've been leading over the past couple of years a £140 million grant programme to fund leading AI innovations in the NHS, and as well as sort of supporting them with money for research. we've been thinking very actively about how do we partner with the innovators and their NHS partners to bring those innovations to market more quickly for the benefit of patients. I'll come back to that point around benefit of patients later, because I think that really sits at the heart of the question about who benefits most from this revolution. AI, for those who are kind of less familiar, is a slightly kind of contested concept from a kind of definitional perspective, but sort of the consensus is it's about using computers to execute tasks that would otherwise require human intelligence. And what we see is basically the beginning of a revolution in healthcare, of the application of AI to a wide range of potential uses, to support and augment clinicians in their work, but also to streamline and make more efficient kind of core processes, administrative process of hospitals, from the booking of patients to the payment of invoices, all of which can kind of free up time for our kind of stretched workforce to focus on the big transformation priorities of the future. I'm sitting in a room here where behind me I have a smart thermostat that controls how hot my room is. That's AI driven. I've done some financial transactions today, online in my digital banking, and AI helps keep me safe from fraud. And tonight, I'm sure I'll be watching something mindless on Netflix that has been promoted to me by an algorithm that knows I probably like some ridiculous trash TV from Paraguay. So AI kind of surrounds us in our daily lives in a way that we may or may not be kind of fully cognizant. But in healthcare, we haven't yet applied it in a way that it's kind of delivering kind of rich and meaningful impact in other industries and other parts of our lives. The AI award, which I run, is here to try and kind of shift the paradigm and drive the safe and ethical adoption of these technologies. And to date, we've invested almost £100 million towards supporting and evaluating kind of leading technologies in this space. And we're delighted that we've got over 180 live projects in the UK, in all regions of the UK, and also some projects up in Scotland and Wales. And we have a number of live projects with Imperial College health partners, with the trust, and with the university as well around here. So this is definitely fertile ground for us. What we are seeing is kind of strong and sustained interest from the partners to whom these tools are being deployed, whether it's in kind of breast cancer screening imaging solutions, whether it's picking up skin cancer malignancies, whether it's helping improve the efficiency of primary care bookings. And what we're working with the system on is, what is the evidence that's required to know that these are innovations we want to adopt in the long term, buy and commission, and then crucially, how do we implement them in a safe and proportionate way in the context of all the other pressures that are going on in the system. So if that's a bit of a sort of tee up of what we're doing through the award, when I think about who benefits most from the gains that AI can unlock, ultimately this is all about how do you improve patient care, and that can be either directly through improving the accuracy of diagnoses, or but Carl will talk later about sort of improving some of the kind of therapeutic pathways that patients are being put on, or it can be from our workforce to free up time for them to care, or time for operational staff to make meaningful efforts in other areas that will drive the service forward. So it's ultimately the patients, but what we're kind of really concerned about, particularly in data-driven fields like AI, is how do we make sure that this is a kind of mutually beneficial endeavour for all the stakeholders, including the commercial innovators who are driving some of this forward. But how do we make sure that the NHS gets value for its data and value for the real world evidence that it helps support be generated in the interests of the commercial partners we work with? So there's a big stream of work going on around ensuring we set up our partnerships correctly so that we get the most value from data in terms of the innovations it drives, but that also we get fair value return for the NHS and for the taxpayer that sits behind us. And the last point I'd sort of like to finish on is, as we start to see more and more tools who reach the kind of evidential requirements set out by trusts or GP practices who will buy the tools, or by NICE who will have a view on the overall efficacy of the tool, or screening programs who will also have a view on evidential requirements. What we need to do is ensure that the implementation of those tools reflects a strong engagement with patients and clinicians about how these tools should be used, and that will actually happen, well before the point where the evidence is fully settled. It'll be part of the whole developmental process. We need to think about how we enable innovators and researchers get access to the real world testing environments that they need to generate the required data. And we need to think really practically about how do we support the safe implementation of these tools into at-scale deployment. And we're always really interested in the centre where I sit, one step removed from the front line that a lot of you will be involved in, around what can we do in the centre to help support and enable that implementation, which can be as prosaic as templates and guidance around how to contract around data-driven technologies. It can be more guidance around how to sign appropriate information governance agreements between innovators and NHS partners, or it could be something else that we haven't fully considered yet. And we're always really open in the centre to having that conversation about what is it we can do to support the people who are really changing the practice on the ground, which is all of you on this call. So I'll leave it there, but really interested to hear what your ask is from me as well during this Q&A.
Fantastic. I'm going to step on in there. Huge thanks, Dan, and thanks to Cam. Sort of your slides came up a little bit late, but you did a beautiful job of talking to that. I'm sure people enjoy looking through them, and as you say, lots to get stuck in on the Q&A. I've written down about 4 or 5 questions as well. So those of you who are listening, you need to get yours in on the chat, please, on that Q&A button, and then we can weave them in so that we don't have to rely on me. But I've hopefully got some good ones there. But I'm going to pass on to a wonderful friend and colleague from Imperial College Health Partners, Amy, who's going to take us into a totally crucial direction here, and looking at the audience we've got here as well. We've got some real experts in the audience around thinking about patient and citizen involvement and how that plays in with data. But it'd be great to hear from you, Amy, and some of your thoughts and experience of working in this area.
Thanks, Bob, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy Pancake Day as well, which I only remembered this morning. So hopefully somebody in my house is going out to go and get some lemons. It's great to be here. Cam, if you're able to share the slides just whilst I'm doing a quick intro. So I'm Amy Darlington. I'm a director at Imperial College Health Partners. We work really closely with Bob and other colleagues at Imperial College Healthcare Trust. We're one of the 15 academic health science networks, and we're a partnership that supports complex change across health and care, predominantly in Northwest London, but not just Northwest London. So we do work across the London region, nationally and internationally as well. And we're really interested in those wicked problems and how innovation, particularly in new ways of working, can help to address those. And because of that space, we've done a lot of work with data, digital and AI as well. And a crucial part, as Dan mentioned in his presentation there, was actually how do we work with members of the public to ensure that when we're thinking about their uses of data in slightly different ways or new technologies, that we're doing it in line with their expectations. And so at Imperial College Health Partners, we've been working closely with Ipsos Mori as a strategic partner in delivering quite a lot of deliberative engagement in this space around to understand what people's expectations of uses of health and care data and some different types of technologies like AI is, to help inform decision makers and policy makers so that we can realise the benefits of these types of technologies in a way that has the confidence and trust of our population. Next slide, please, Cam. Thank you. So we've been doing a lot of work in this space. So we've supported the One London Citizen Summit a few years ago, which some of you might be familiar with, on the uses of health and care data. We've done some work with the Discover Now Health Data Research Hub, but we're not the only ones that are talking to the public about this. So there's been some great other work up in Manchester, and you'll see a picture of the report there joined up. And there's been quite a lot of work undertaken by Understanding Patient Data and other national bodies to really understand what people feel about how their health and care data is used for individual care, but actually importantly beyond individual care, and all of the value that can derive. Next slide, please, Cam. So I want to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the themes that are coming out of those multiple public engagement exercises. And what's quite interesting actually is, no matter really where or how you talk to the public about this, there are really consistent themes that come out. And actually, I think that's really pertinent, particularly at a national level, and in roles like the one that Dan holds around thinking, how do we set some of the standards around this work nationally as well? So generally, when we speak to members of the public, there's quite a low awareness actually of how their health and care data is used. There's quite a lot of frustration that they have to often repeat their story 10 times over when they're going to different parts of the healthcare system, and they want that addressed. So they want joined up information to support their own individual care. But then when you start talking to them actually around, well, we could use that data that's derived from your episodes of care in other ways to benefit wider population through research and planning and improvement. There's quite a lot of support for using information in that way, and they expect it to be brought together, and there's support for doing that, but with the right conditions in place. And crucially, those conditions are really important. So around some of the safeguards and controls about who has access to that data, but also some of the repercussions if people use that data in a way that might be malicious or otherwise. Now, often you'll hear about de-identified data, so data that's been stripped of identifiers so that people like researchers can use it, because often they don't care that it's about me, Amy Darlington, or Bob, or Dan, or Carl, but they care about actually what it says about us. So it's stripped of any identifiable information, and it's a hugely valuable asset for research and planning and improvement and other purposes. And that de-identification really reassures the public in its use. So privacy is really important, but not more important than realizing some of the benefits of research and otherwise. So actually that de-identification is really crucial. Next slide, please, Cam. Thank you. So there is often the concern when we start to talk to people about some of the other uses, and particularly some of that concern derives from access from third-party organisations, and it won't surprise any of you that concern largely is around commercial organisations. But there is also an understanding that the more kind of people learn about how commercial organisations are involved in using data in this way, and often for what purposes and reasons that is, generally for public good, although there is some commercial benefit, of course, but it is largely around improving health and care and interventions, medicines, technologies, etc. People are generally supporters of that, but there needs to be those really kind of strict controls in place. And where companies are undertaking research or commercial development, and this is inclusive of the AI space, but much broader as well, there is quite a strong set of expectations that have been expressed now by multiple different public engagement exercises. So the outputs or the work, the purpose for doing it needs to be in the public interest. So people understand that there is a commercial interest often as well, but it can't solely be about making money. People do recognise that there are quite significant financial benefits for the NHS in people accessing and using this data, and there's strong expectations around charging for access, and actually that charging should be proportionate to the type of organisation that you are. So often we hear we want big pharmaceuticals charged a lot more than small charities, so usually based on turnover, but an expectation that actually it costs quite a lot of money to store, de-identify and hold this data in a way that's safe and controlled, and that money needs to be recouped somehow. So there's a real strong expectation around charging. Robust and transparent safeguards seems quite obvious, but actually these are quite difficult things often to put in place. And what we've done quite a lot over the last few years is really work with the public to understand what that looks like, because there are trade-offs around all of this. We can implement strict controls around who accesses the data, but then does that exclude certain innovators, for example, or charities who might not be able to have the right approvals and credentials? So talking and exploring the trade-offs with people around who and how that data is accessed has been something that has been really important to the public, and they've really welcomed being involved in that decision-making process. Also, who agrees who gets access to this really valuable asset? Time and time again, we hear about the requirement for an independent data access group. So fundamentally a group of members of the public reflective of the relevant population, but also experts in data, in information governance, in clinical domains, that are able to kind of review these proposals, these requests for data access, and make genuinely informed and reasoned decisions about whether that should go ahead or not. There should be penalties and repercussions in place for misuse and malpractice, and importantly, so there needs to be transparency around how that data is used. So information should be shared around who's accessing the data, for what reason, and what are some of the findings that are coming out of that. Next slide, please. So my final slide really is just around red lines, and there aren't many, but there are definitely some. So the first thing that we hear time and time again is that data should never, ever be given to insurance companies or used for marketing purposes. And interestingly, actually, some insurance companies are wanting to get into the space more of working with providers around improving healthcare. And actually, this has been a clear red line that's been expressed. So certainly in my part of the world, and I sit on a board that runs a data hub, like we've had to say no. The reasoning is sound, but this is a clear red line for the public. Must only be used for the agreed purpose as set out in the application. So this isn't about a free-for-all. And interestingly, people have quite different views around using parts of a data set or a whole data set. And we're using a whole data set where it's more an exploratory use of the data. People want additional controls and rules in place. And data must not be sold. So whilst people are very supportive of charging for access to that data, that access is within a safe environment, a trusted health data environment. It should never have been sold and sent to third-party organisations. So I'll leave it there. I'm conscious of time, but hopefully some useful points there that helpful to the discussion.
Fantastic. Amy, that's amazing. Huge thanks. Loads in there for us to think about. And I've written down the word in bold about expect, about what people expect. So we can maybe get into that a little bit. We're going to get on a sort of a virtual aeroplane or some sort of time machine across to the west coast of the States and go and catch up with a wonderful friend of the Trust, Carl Bate. I'll leave Carl to introduce himself. Really interesting story here of really how you can utilize, I guess, as a clinician, the paediatrician in me is really excited by the sorts of support, Carl, that the work you're doing could help me to look after my patients better. So, Carl, over to you.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Bob, and it's great to be here. Second coffee of the day, so thank you guys as well for the invite. Could I have the slides up, please? Just while they're coming up, a little bit about my background. So my name is Carl Bate. I am the CEO at RecoverX. We're an evidence-based AI company here in San Francisco, and our mission is to organize, advance, and deploy the world's medical evidence via safe AI. And I'll come on to what that really means and why we think that's important. Next slide, please. The first thing to say is we hear a lot about AI's difficulties in healthcare. And as we set about founding RecoverX to solve the knowledge challenge in medicine, we were very thoughtful around who we wanted to partner with. So firstly, we are seed funded right now, and we're backed by Health 2047, which is the Silicon Valley innovation arm of the American Medical Association. So our view is that we transform healthcare with the professionals at the front end, and that we don't do it kind of butting up to them. Our second strategic partner is BMJ Best Practice, which has a wonderful evidence-based data set which we use within our platform, which I'll come on to. And we are absolutely committed to, and I think we can demonstrate placing not only clinical quality, but also the ethics of AI at the core of what we are setting out to achieve. Next slide, please. So this is how we see the problem. On the one hand, we think, as wonderful as clinicians are, and they do a lot of outstanding work, there's simply too much knowledge already for humans to stay current on and apply. And on the other side of this, if you look at research, actually, if you speak to those guys, there's too little evidence to bring some of the amazing innovation in therapy out of the lab, both in biopharma and the protein revolution, into the real world. So how does the science connect to real world complexity? And next slide, please. And the reason that we think we really need to do something about this is that right now, we've got two or three really big issues that we think healthcare faces. The first is quality and safety. And again, despite the amazing work, the National Academy of Medicine, the research suggests that pretty much most of us may experience some diagnostic error in our lifetime. And it's not just patients that suffer, it's the clinician. We know that physician and doctor burnout is a massive issue. And we know that there are just tremendous cognitive challenges, and we think it's about time that we provided better support to our frontline workers. Then we look at the cost and sustainability. If you look at what the data suggests, and by the way, there isn't that much, and we think we need a much better handle on it. But the avoidable costs from not getting patients on the right pathway sooner are astronomical. Within the US, it's calculated to be about $500 billion of a $3.5 trillion budget. But some of our experts who've been studying this phenomenon for like 2 decades now, they think that's undercut. And we think that we shouldn't be spending cost on things that could be avoided, because we think that money can be used in a far better way. Particularly, we see the challenges of creating sustainable healthcare. And then finally, which isn't really the focus of today, we know that there's a lot of advancement in precision medicine and science, but actually there's a lot of challenge in bringing it out of the lab into the real world. And so really at RecoverX, we're setting about with our partners and our friends to solve these challenges. Next slide. So this is how we're doing it. We're building some foundational AI, and I'll come on to what that looks like in a minute, where we safely combine the best expert evidence and AI to help get the best decision for every patient. And ultimately, we see our platform helping advance new evidence generation. Next slide. By the way, this voice activation, we don't even have this here in Silicon Valley. I think this is a tremendous, you should export this. This is much better than my Siri. So in order to do this, there are 3 key barriers that we see to bring knowledge into clinical determination. There's 2 or 3 things that we see that we've got to do. The first thing is, actually, AI is really bad at telling the difference between truth and falsehood. And if you look at the work of OpenAI and DeepMind, some tremendous work, it's worth looking at how now they are spending hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, trying to create something called safe AI. And what they're doing is these really powerful models. You may have heard of GPT-3, you may have heard of Google Switch. What they're trying to do is, after they've trained them on the internet to come up with some wonderful ability to understand all of that knowledge and augment humans and do things with it, they're trying to then ground the AI in truth. So kind of teach it good from bad, harmful things from useful things after the fact. And we think that's tremendous work, but actually we wonder whether that's the right approach for healthcare. And actually how we start out is the other way around. We don't start out with super large AI trained on masses of data. We start out with gold standard evidence, and we know that evidence itself today has biases and gaps, but it's a wonderful start. So we start by taking the evidence basis itself and making that computable. So it's fundamentally a different thesis to IBM Watson and some of the prior work that's gone on before. The second thing we've got to do when we've got good data into the AI is actually not increase the time and workload on the very person we're trying to help the patient. And so the technology we're building is designed to help the insight find the clinician in a very transparent way. And then finally, which isn't really the focus of today, we know that there's limited feedback on real world evidence generation. And despite the best work of evidence-based researchers, it can be slow and generalized. And so we see a future where the technology we're building can be like a lens on this data, which could help speed up new evidence generation, which is really important to get more stratification as well. Next slide. And so what this looks like, the first technology we're building is called Clinical CoPilot. It's a little hard to see the screen. We have a demo and we're very happy to share it with folks if you're interested. But basically how it works, it's kind of like a GPS for diagnostic determination. And actually there's a wonderful paper, if you haven't seen it already, by Julia Adler-Milstein at UCSF. I think it came out in November last year, talking about wayfinding AI. And it's exactly actually what our technology does. We auto scan the chart, and based on the scan of the chart, and we can do it with conversation as well, but our first product is a processing of the chart. We kind of look at what's there, we map what's in the chart to evidence, and we show almost like 5 points on the diagnostic map where we think the patient might be. That's kind of the GPS. And we show 5 potential differentials. And for each of those differentials, we show next best questions, things that a clinician may wish to consider. And we also show all of the evidence as to why we think those questions may be relevant. So we're really designing to help either confirm or expand the clinician's determination at every step to get the patient on the right pathway. All of this is backed by BMJ evidence-based data as well, which with feedback we get is just really essential and also very tremendous for what we're building. Next slide, please. In terms of our initial feedback, so we have this running right now with our first user. He's a wonderful guy called Dr. Mark Savant, very innovative primary care physician in San Francisco. And we're about to roll out to larger scale production pilots here in the US from around about Q2. And this is the initial feedback we're getting. The first is the 80-20 rule. So 20% of patients causing 80% of the cognitive load. Like literally, what question do I ask next? And we get tremendous feedback that like the technology is just a helpful prompt and actually almost part of continuous knowledge diffusion into the expert. Again, I know I want to really say like we're not replacing it. It is that kind of instrumentation to help in the determination. The other feedback we get is it's very useful, which is like good, that it provides confirmatory and actionable suggestions. The other bit of feedback, actually, Bob, this is something you mentioned to me like about a year ago, so we're just catching up, is that, as you know, a lot of patients, a lot of us, like we kind of go to our clinician and we've used Dr. Google and we care a lot about our health, right? The early feedback that's actually surprising and wonderful feedback is actually using CoPilot with the patient. Like, well, what do you think? And this is kind of what the evidence is suggesting. Let's like have a collaboration around your history taking and like your kind of context, and let's just kind of work this through together. And our initial feedback is this is a really promising area for the technology to help the patient-physician interaction. Then a couple of other things, we're seeing some really interesting opportunity in Paul for helping kind of smarter routing between the primary care and specialty care. And directly today, whilst this isn't an app that integrates into the EHR environment, we ultimately see this being API directly into the EHR. Next one. I've only got a couple more, then I'll pause. In terms of our direction, whilst I've shown you the first product called CoPilot, it's a platform. Ultimately, we see the platform supporting multiple additional use cases on this kind of cognitive AI core, which probably is beyond the scope of today. But we're building a kind of general AI for medicine that can help with clinical question answering. And the first embodiment is a thoughtful product to be the instrumentation on to make decisioning. Next one. And I think this is the last one. So where are we right now? So we have our technology in beta. It will be MVP. It will be ready for larger scale pilots in about 6 weeks time or so. We will be expanding our evidence content, including adding adverse drug reactions. And it's wonderful to be working with BMJ in terms of taking their content and making it computable. They are wonderful partners with us. We have a couple formal studies lined up with UCSF, both a retrospective and hopefully a prospective study that we're shaping right now. Ultimately, we see this work contributing to defining, well, what is safe AI in healthcare? And there's a lot of questions here around, how can we help support active anti-bias? what actually does it mean to use AI in their decisioning in the first place? And the way we see it, it's almost like if there are 5 levels of autonomous driving today, maybe there'll be a number of levels of augmentation with labels around that and efficacy proven as we start to bring the symbiosis of AI and the human intelligence in a medical practice. And ultimately at RecoverX, we're absolutely dedicated towards safe, reliable and general AI in medicine. That's it. Thank you very much. I shall pause now, pass back to Bob.
Huge thanks, Carl. Fantastic stuff. And I've been trying to sort of scroll through and keep an eye on the questions. So those of you listening in, and indeed for our speakers, if you hit that Q&A button, you should see a number of published questions. Gold star to Dan, who's been busy whirring away already, unless it's some sort of algorithm. You never quite know. Maybe that's where we need to get to with this. So what we're going to try and do, we've got about 20 minutes or so. So we'll have a discussion. I hope that you can see the 4 of us up here. We'll have a bit of a discussion around a few things. I want to start off with, I guess my sort of curiosity quotient goes far. I'm a lifetime NHS person, and one of my reflections is we're not great at learning from outside healthcare on things. And Dan, I was very struck by your really very sort of human introduction of different bits of our life where AI is already front and central to it. I was thinking about the weather app as well that tells me when I'm going to get wet on my bicycle. As I could just look out the window, I suspect would be the other way on that front. But it'd be great to just hear from the 3 of you really a bit about that piece about transferring learning from other industries into healthcare. And I guess I'm not just interested in the technology, but I'm really interested, almost Amy, in your piece about the public expectation to pick up that word and how that sort of plays through. And it, almost down the point you were making earlier, is to say, look, we sort of stumbled into this in all sorts of walks of our life, sometimes realizing it, sometimes not. My brain's whirring on how we might utilize that thoughtfully in healthcare, and where some things are very similar and actually where some things we need to say, no, actually healthcare is really different. But it'd be great. Dan, do you want to kick off on that? And we'll go to Amy and then Carl.
Super. And yeah, you'll be fascinated by the perspectives of my fellow panelists. I mean, the first point I'd kind of make is sort of, there's almost a moral imperative to support this innovation because of the benefit it can have for patients. We just need to think very carefully in a way that I'm sure Amy will kind of talk about around how we use data and how we give access to, and what terms we give access to data. The NHS context has some very important features of it. Not least of all, it's highly regulated because of the stakes at play in terms of the impact on people's health. So healthcare will always be different to some types of consumer industries, but it isn't different to industries like financial services, which are also heavily regulated. So we need to kind of recognise we're different, but we're not always as different as we think. One of the pieces of kind of learning from outside that I reflect on and try and kind of bring in to the degree it's sort of appropriate in our context is, how do we think about what do we need to know to prove that something works? And traditionally there's been a model of sort of almost kind of gold-plated randomized controlled trials that take many years, report academically, and off the back of that we make commissioning decisions. And you could be talking about kind of 5 years end to end, which doesn't really work when the development cycle of some of these digital tools is measured in months rather than years. And the problem with it is you're holding back innovation that could benefit patients from reaching the market at scale. So we need to think about how can we be more agile and think about kind of service evaluation and rapid cycle evaluation that allows us to be kind of robust and make sure we're deploying tools in a safe way and that we understand the consequences of them, particularly the sort of the human interaction, the interactions between humans in the operational flow and the digital tool. But I think a default position, which is a 3-year randomized control trial academic publication, isn't going to support the kind of pressing needs we have, particularly in a post kind of COVID recovery world. So I sort of identified the challenge, haven't yet figured out the solution, but thinking about it, and keen to hear kind of Amy and Carl's thoughts on that.
Fantastic. Amy, have you got some solutions for us?
Maybe some more thoughts. So from a public perspective, we often hear quite a lot of frustration, because people are using these types of technologies and understands that their sensitive data is being used, and they, by other sectors in a much more innovative and agile way. So often, conversations that I have with the public start in quite a frustrated place, like why are we so archaic in the NHS, and why can't we move faster and further? And actually then when we get to explore what some of the constraints are, we're highly regulated, this is different classed as different types of data by law, all of these different kind of, financial and technological constraints, often huge fragmentation, linking of data, etc. There is, I think what that does actually is then say, okay, well, we're willing to forego some of the risks around privacy or around kind of commercial access, for example, or we're willing to be a bit more relaxed on that because we realise that we need to speed up the benefits. So let's reduce some of the controls. So, for instance, around access to data, historically in the part of London that I work, every data access request for research had to have a local NHS sponsor. Public were like, this is crazy. Like, this is just going to slow everything down. It's a huge backlog. Like, ditch that. Get some clinicians on your data access group, and you've still got that view, but it's in a much more agile way. So one very kind of pragmatic example, but there is an appetite there, I think, from the public for us to move further and faster, but to do so in a way that is considered. And I guess to do that, work with them in partnership. So I think where we make the mistake time and time again is assume what the public do or don't want and don't have a meaningful conversation with them. Or if we do, we ask them things which we get an uninformed response about, because why would they understand some of the complexities that we are operating within? So what deliberation as a methodology does is inform people, is very explicit about the constraints, and then ask them to weigh up the trade-offs. And what that means is we come out with very kind of considered recommendations to policymakers. Just one final thought, because I'm sure Carl's got lots of thoughts on this. To Dan's provocation around how do we move kind of quicker. So certainly in other parts of my work, apart from public engagement, we're trying to adopt a much more kind of living laboratory, I guess, approach to our work. So like, let's not kind of go for a gold standard. Let's get some stuff. Let's try it. Let's kind of evaluate it as we go, that rapid evaluation. Let's bring patients and the public into those conversations, design and evaluation, clinicians, stakeholders, and actually let's see what works, what sticks, why it does, why it doesn't. And actually what that the pandemic did was enable us or empower us to do that in a much more, and actually necessitate us to do that in a much more kind of agile and quick way. But I think the lasting effects of that is we're able to see, well, this could influence how we are working and how we are implementing change across healthcare much more broadly. So I think there is appetite there. But yes, some perhaps different approaches and some courage needed to help us do that.
Carl, any quick thoughts on that? And then we've got some questions we've got to get stuck into.
Yeah, I really like both what Dan and Amy said. So the first thing, I think there's a distinction between gold standard in theory and gold standard in practice. And actually, randomized trials, very useful, but actually they don't reflect the real world. So I think a move to stage 4 trials, when you can get very good real world evidence, is going to be essential for us. And actually, Amy, the living lab, I totally agree. I think the phrase we hear is it's almost like the resurgence of this idea of the learning health system. And in order to have a learning health system, what's required is to understand the clinical context of the patient, not only the data. So I think that's why it's essential we can start to have better ways of understanding that kind of front end, and we would argue by applying an evidence filter to it is a way to help speed this entire process of getting things out of the lab into the hands of folks that actually need it.
Great stuff. Listen, guys, I'll get you to have a little look down the questions, and Richard's popped up one about the regulatory piece. I mean, Amy, you might want to have a little look on that, but I really wanted, Dan, you had a go at answering on text Debbie's question So those of you who are able to access the chat, a really interesting question from Debbie. Working for a company who's designed and built a self-referral platform in collaboration with senior clinicians, currently being used with great success in parts of the NHS. However, it's very difficult for me to speak with anyone in other areas of the country within the NHS. Should it be made easier for companies who have amazing ideas and products to be able to register these? So this is the great conundrum. I introduce myself as, working in the NHS. When it's convenient, we talk about one NHS, don't we? And we all celebrate tea parties and go, yay, and then you realize how extraordinarily fragmented it is. And we get into all sorts of things that if things weren't invented in my bit of the NHS, then it's much harder. So I guess, Dan, it'd be good for you to say a little word. And in a way, you and Amy and your roles are in a really interesting space, both nationally and then sort of regionally, Amy within Imperial College Health Partners, for us to really think hard about spread. And then people like me working in a trust. I guess between the three of us, we should be able to answer Debbie's question pretty well. But Dan, when you sit nationally around that, you must sort of read that slightly and want to, A, recognise that Debbie's point is very real, and then B, want to whack your head on the table, because we don't do brilliantly on that front, as Debbie's rather beautifully said. Any thoughts on how we could seriously improve on that? Well, Dan, you're on mute.
So there was a phrase coined kind of almost 10 years ago when we looked at the spread of innovation in the NHS, which was the NHS has these islands of innovation. We're good at coming up with ideas. We're not very good at spreading them. And so I recognise the frustration and challenge Debbie's raising. From a kind of a policy perspective, we recognise this, and we're thinking about how nationally we can effectively provide some guidance to the market around the sheer volume of digital tools that are available, and the more that are being developed and made available, and how we can help local buyers of the tools, so local trusts or GP practices or ICSs or whoever the ultimate buyer is, help them understand which of the hundreds or thousands of tools are potentially relevant to them and have evidence that means they're worth looking at. And that's underpinned by some kind of technical standards like the digital technology assessment criteria that NHSX published, but it'll also be informed by other criteria around efficacy and kind of utility and pathways. So that's a bit of a trail of work to come. In the short term, Debbie, what I would say is, one, try and build off the bridgeheads you've got in terms of the engaged sites that you're working with, and think about their kind of geographic partners and the integrated care systems they sit within. And then secondly, and maybe Amy will pick this up, speak to your local AHSN, or maybe even multiple AHSNs, depending on where in the country you're working, and talk to them about the local relationships that are going to be most valuable to them to pursue. And really that the academic health science networks are a sort of key mechanism by which innovation spread at a local level, plugged into local needs. So those would be my kind of two kind of short-term bits of advice. Build on what you've got and try and sort of get your existing advocates to advocate for you kind of more widely across the geography, and then speak to your HSNs and see what they can do to help.
Amy, you're brilliantly placed as a leader within one of our AHSNs. How does that feel from your perspective?
Yeah, so I'd agree with that. I do think there is there's a fundamental challenge. So our inbox fills up every day with really great innovations that people are have worked really hard on and are trying to kind of get spread into the NHS. And often the challenge that we have is not actually that they're not great innovations, but they're not meeting a necessary need that's been articulated by our local system. And there's something I think, when Bob, you asked or posed the question, how can we get better at this? There's something about how as an NHS, and I'm doing exactly the same as a single NHS, as NHS systems, regions, ICSs, we can get much more explicit about our needs or what are our priorities that could be met or better met through working in partnership with industry or through new innovative technologies. Because otherwise, I think what we will always have is a singular kind of fragmented organization saying this is really great for me, but actually it becomes a barrier to then that further spread. So I think certainly organizations like Imperial College Health Partners try to work very hard with our integrated care system to say, look, we need to get better at articulating needs, because then when we can articulate that out to innovators, actually what that will bring is potential solutions. Now, it may be, Debbie, that your solution isn't something that would meet the needs in Northwest London, which is my area. But what we can do, and what each HSN should be able to do, is then put you in contact with the rest of the network, because as Dan said, if it's not a priority in our area, it may be in other areas. So please do get into contact with your local HSN, because we're plugged into that national network as well. But there is something I think we need to think about as emerging ICSs around having a different approach to how we work with industry and how we get better at articulating our needs.
Great stuff, Amy. I'm going to come to Carl with a slightly different question. And Carl, you started to sort of answer in the text, but I want to also reflect on some learning I had last week, where we were talking about doing a lot of community engagement work. And I was actually down in South London doing some learning with some friends down there. And I was very struck by the comment around we need to make sure that the local communities we are working with sort of have and hold their data. They need to be in a position to be able to, if you want to make local improvements that are community driven, the clinicians and everyone else is saying, well, I can't do it without data. And yet we sort of, in a way, take people's data, and we're not very good about sort of giving it back to them. So I was struck by the conversation with Tanya's excellent question and your response. So I guess you might want to touch a little bit on, I guess, where the data goes. But what about my provocation that we should be much better at giving data back to patients, I guess, in the form of information that we want people to be doing more self-care. We want to be thinking about health and well-being more. I'd love your comment on that. And we've got about 2 or 3 minutes before we need to wrap up. So quick comment, and then we'll maybe say come to everyone for a 30 second. Yeah, quick one on that massive topic. Yeah.
Quick comment on one of the deepest challenges in healthcare. Yeah, cheers, Bob. I must remember to buy you a pint. So just a couple of things. And firstly, what we're building is like a distributed knowledge approach. So we're very passionate about all of the full knowledge being used within that healthcare provider to help them improve knowledge, improve care delivery. And then at the same time, what we aspire to do is not necessarily share de-identified patient data in full, but share the evidence that's kind of useful from all of those interactions, which can then be used for more like a analysis across the entire universe of the evidence that we deploy and that we learn from. That's kind of the idea on the knowledge distribution and how we see the distinction between patient data and actually evidence. And then the second thing, I totally agree. I think we need to get on the front foot. I don't think Dr. Google is that helpful, actually. And actually Google themselves are trying to figure out what they do next, because 5% of search traffic is actually related to health, as you would expect. So I think it's going to be about working with our clinical professionals who do have the knowledge and training to use this insight as part of that collaboration. And that's what's really exciting, because unsolicited, that's what our first user, Bob, came back and said, I'm using this stuff literally to help me in my interaction with the patient, to help them. So I think that's a very exciting development for us.
Fantastic. And I think I'm really struck as, I guess, playing into my sort of life and role as a paediatrician, how the best conversations I've had with patients, and I told you this story, Carl, about, when people come and see me, and I would say to some parents, what did you find when you looked this up on Google? And they look at me very embarrassed, as trying to sort of pretend that they hadn't. And I said, come on, let's have a look at this together. And there's something, isn't there, about those clinical interactions and about how we utilize technology together. And actually the role of me as a paediatrician actually found very usefully going through a Google search with a family and trying to help them to see why certain posts are particularly helpful and others might actually have some element of misinformation or things that might particularly worry them. So there's a lovely piece there about, I think what's critical here, isn't it? It's about how we interface people and technology sort of beautifully together. We're almost out of time, but not so far out of time that I think we should definitely hear a sort of a last reflection, maybe from Amy first and then from Dan. There's a couple of other questions that have come up. Dan's done a wonderful job of answering Patricia's question about back office teams. But Amy, any sort of final reflections from what we've talked about? Clearly, this is a conversation we need to continue.
So firstly, thank you for inviting me. It's been a really nice end to my day. I know, Carl, it's not the end to yours. So I think reflections. I think we have huge opportunities in this space. I think we need to, I would say this, we need to continue to involve the public in our conversations, whether that be on a kind of consultation level as a clinician with patient Bob, as you were just explaining, and the work that Carl's doing, but also more broadly at a policy level in the work that Dan and others are working on. Because I think it can be hugely insightful to learn from patients and the public around actually how they might tackle some of the dilemmas that as decision makers we're trying to tackle every day. I think we should be brave, we should be courageous. I think we should look to other sectors to learn from them and some of the challenges. This isn't the first time that people have experienced some of the dilemmas that we are. And also we should look to other parts of the world as well. And there's some great examples from other health systems across the globe. So we should continue to learn and do that as well as health systems. And I'm particularly kind of fond and promoting the living lab approach to change as well. So those reflections from me. Thank you.
Yeah, great reflections, Amy. Wonderful to have you here. And Dan, final thoughts to you.
I mean, I think as with a lot of things in life, that the devil's really in the detail here. So how we think about how and when we share data and on what basis, how we think about the implementation of tools that are then proven is really going to determine the degree to which we benefit from the potential of AI. And we haven't touched on it today, but there are also some important risks around the implementation of AI that we need to mindfully design against to prevent unintentionally exacerbating health inequalities, because a tool works very well for one demographic but doesn't work well for another, and that leads to a kind of a differential impact. So I think a kind of a plea for a continued rich conversation around this that Amy is doing a lot of really important work on. Also, a really rich conversation with clinicians about how these tools are going to support them in their practice, and then ultimately, from someone sitting in the centre in one of the ivory towers, really hearing from the people testing, developing, implementing, trying these tools, and hearing what is it we can do centrally to kind of support that, because the more thoughtful we are, the better we execute around the implementation, the more value we're going to get more quickly, and ultimately that benefits patients in the pathways that we're supporting across.
Huge thanks, Dan. Absolutely brilliantly done. I'm actually going to, that's the penultimate word. The last word, I'm very struck, Helen, by your wonderful comment in the Q&A. So those of you, I know there's 2 or 3 people who've got in touch say they can't read the Q&A. So I promise every single question has been verbally done by me. So we're going to stick to that. But Helen's put a great little sort of comment, which I think is absolutely brilliant. And I sort of hadn't spotted this, but you're absolutely right. Saying owning your data when pregnant in a booklet is incredibly empowering. And then the healthcare system goes and sort of takes it back. So I think an absolutely brilliant story of sort of where I guess inadvertently we sort of get this stuff wrong. And as you say, the sort of the use of digital technology on an ongoing basis. And again, about who owns this feels like a really important one. Listen, we've created content for about 27 more webinars. Unfortunately, time is up, and this is all we can get to from this one. A few thank yous, massive thank you, Amy, Carl, Dan. You've been absolutely brilliant, and some really interesting work you're doing, some great provocations, and just a really wonderful conversation that I think probably we'd all admit, all 4 of us, has left more questions than answers. But you know what, I think that's probably a really good place and space for us to be with this. And to me, very fundamental to all of this is actually about learning, is about building trust, is about being curious. And I think we can only do that together. And I think all of us, whether you're working in technology, whether you're a patient, whether you're a member of the local community, whether you're working in healthcare, whether you're in a policy role, we've all got a sort of joint responsibility trying to land this in as thoughtful ways as possible. What's totally clear to me is we can't not do it. And on the measurement piece, I get frustrated sometimes that we put a very high bar on doing stuff and we don't measure the impact of not doing some of this stuff. I'm very, very clear in my mind that we'd be letting our patients down. And, we have some very serious issues around inequalities and poor outcomes that we have to tackle. So loads of work for us to do, plenty of homework for us to think about on our bicycles home a little bit later. Thank you everybody for joining. We will be putting this recording up on our website, and Tanya and Cam and Nehar in the background, final thank you to you. These things take quite a lot of work to set up. Really grateful for your efforts in doing that. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. And as ever, comments, feedback, very gratefully received. We will look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks everybody, and good evening.